Hello, I'm Doug Plum. I'm coming from Canada and I am a self-educated philosopher. I've spent several years actually studying philosophy, primarily Immanuel Kant and to some extent the Greeks, but mainly Immanuel Kant. And my talks always come from a Kantian perspective because I think, along with many others, that he was a monumental figure in the world of philosophy. And his philosophy is always referenced by post-Kantian philosophers. Now, first of all, before I get into this, this is going to be a short video. I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of truth. Now, the truth itself is very elusive, particularly in the empirical sense. We have the empirical sense of truth and the lawful sense of truth. Now, in the empirical sense, truth becomes very elusive, so consequently we arrive at truth by disproving lies. And this is best explained by, manifest in the scientific method. A scientist comes up with a hypothesis and goes and performs experiments to try and disprove that hypothesis. Once that hypothesis has been disproved, then he can go back and modify his hypothesis until he finally arrives at a hypothesis that cannot be disproven. And this is the definition of truth in science. Truth in science occurs when you have a hypothesis that cannot be disproven. So that is the nature of truth, and it turns out that because this is how we think, it turns out that lies are very easy to spot and disprove. Truth tends to be harder to prove than lies are to disprove, which makes us on the alt-right very fortunate because we're surrounded by lies. We got targets everywhere. This is a target-rich environment, and my first target is Stephan Molyneux, and I am by no means stopping there. Okay, so on to Stephan. Stephan says that Jews run everything because they are smarter than everyone else, on average. Now, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, and the distributions shown in these statistics do not really prove that there are a greater number of smart Jews than smart Christians. Because of even if you accept those statistics of Jews being smarter, you've got to remember that there's a lot more Christians, a lot more rational thinkers than there are Jews. But we can look at everything and see that everything is in shambles. The banks are ripping us off. The government is a great big mess. We're in multiple wars. Publishing almost forbids the publication of truth. Education is, well, it's shit, and I'm going to get into one example of that in this talk. So we can safely say that, number one, the establishment is run by Jews. Stephan Molyneux says that the establishment is run by Jews because they are smarter, and I'm pointing out the fact that everything is in shambles. Now, we, from the alt-right, ask, when we see how the establishment operates, we ask a good question. Are they stupid or are they evil? The nature of philosophy is not to come up with good answers. It's to come up with good questions. I mean, you come up with a good question, you can type it in on Google, you can ask somebody, you can always find an answer. The real thing is to come up with a good question. And a good question is, are they stupid or are they evil? Now, the third thing that I want to talk about is on the subject of political anarchy. Stephan Molyneux is an anarchist, as are many others on the web. I'm here to tell you what's wrong with anarchy. Now, I got into a little bit of this in my video, Law, the Light of Reason and Conscience, but I'm going to put something in there that I didn't put in that video. There's a difference between fault and responsibility. And in a lawless world, in a world of anarchy, there is no equalization between these two. So in an anarchy, if you kill somebody, their death is your fault, but they take responsibility. Under a lawful state, the responsibility goes to you. So, law bridges the gap between fault and responsibility. With law, we get protection of freedom of will. The purpose of rational law is to protect freedom of will. Now, for the last 100 years, we've been surrounded by progressive law, which is to invert rational thinking and to infringe on the right of freedom of will, best preserved by the New Testament single commandment of love thy neighbor as thyself. The progressive law does not require our rulers to do so. Since the War Powers Act, the state has been at war with the people. And so it has set Christian law aside, and we are moving towards a Talmudic law. So I ask you, does law come from authority, or does authority come from law? Under a progressive state, law comes from authority. Authorities make the laws up as best suits them. In a rational, Christian, lawful state, authority comes from law. Authorities are there to simply administer and see that the law is carried out in its rational sense. Under Christian law, law is universal and makes no differentials based on race or wealth. Now, there's some key aspects of Christian law that I discuss in my movie, Law, the Light of Reason and Conscience, and this is eating from the tree of knowledge, separation of powers, and the Holy Trinity. I explain exactly what these terms mean in the context of law. So, that's all I have to say today. Watch my movie to learn more about logos and Christian law versus progressivism and anarchy. Thank you very much.